welcome to another episode of the Acid Trash Jamboree, a channel dedicated to showing and discussing offbeat music and films. Now, the whole point of the channel is to keep things fresh and diverse, so this time around we'll be taking a look at some incredibly strange black metal, kicking things off by going through a trio of releases by the cult Lithuanian group Anubi. Now, Anubi existed for approximately 10 years, forming in 1992 as an experimental duo consisting of guitarist Laurinas Jukonis, aka Thoth, and drummer Arturus Araminas, aka Renofa. Then the following year they were joined by a vocalist named Martynas Meskauskas, aka Lord Ominous. Now this trio recorded 3 demos together, though by the time Anubi recorded their one and only album in 1996, the band's lineup had expanded greatly, incorporating an extra guitarist, a bassist, a keyboard player, and even a saxophonist, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Now, I'll be honest, my Lithuanian isn't what it used to be, so instead of embarrassing myself and mispronouncing everything, wherever possible during this video I'll be referring to the song and album titles by their English translations. So we start with Anubi's debut demo, which, luckily enough, has an English title, God's Pantheon, and was originally self-released on cassette in 1993, before being reissued on CD in 2001 by the Welsh label Odium Records. Intro Horde of Hell gets things underway with a lo-fi assemblage of wayward violin sawing, back in layers of Black Legions-esque mumbling, groaning, whimpering and rasping voices from beyond, all of which are fed through some kind of trippy space echo device. So yeah, so far so sinister. Blood Orgy in Giza is also heavy on the space echo, with sections of freeform, scratchy fuzz guitar rawness bleeding into slow, rhythmic parts as ritualistic caveman drums thump doomily around the most primitive of power chord riffs, whilst Lord Ominous fully lives up to his moniker, growling away quietly in the shadows like some horrific demonic entity. Next, Court of Osiris is a bit more animated, though no less primitive riff-wise. Its slightly post-punky bass actually makes the song sound a bit like Joy Division playing on half speed. Think Over and Obey is the longest piece here, starting off with more of that Black Legion-style grim vocal work. This is soon joined by weird, tape-manipulated, psychedelic guitar noodling, which warps in and out of focus for several minutes before coalescing into yet another echoey half riff, which is soon discarded in favour of a psychedelic meditation on a single chord, the group pounding and droning away like a black metal version of Pink Floyd. By the time of Mystery of the Moon, the energy drinks have well and truly kicked in, and Anubi finally pick up some speed for a couple of minutes. This one sporting some thoroughly out-of-tune, off-piste bass work from Thoth. Towards the back end of the demo, Strange Future and Darkest Rituals are entirely drumless, psychedelic ambient pieces, the former revolving dreamily around a simple repeated power chord pattern, whilst the latter consists mostly of backwards bass grumbling. The strangely titled Won't Penetrate Ritual in the Morning Light closes things on a slow, depressive crawl, its sad, stately guitar line almost threatening to take things into the realms of traditional song form for a second, but this being Anubi, they decide to strip it out of the mix after a minute or so, the piece instead petering out into oblivion with just drums and vocals. A suitably baffling end then to a pretty bizarre recording. So yeah, I keep mentioning them, but this demo does play out like a Lithuanian version of what some of the Black Legions projects were doing over in France around the same time in the early 90s, though whether the two camps were aware of each other, I've no idea. The year after God's Pantheon, Anubi recorded Mastarbo Dvelksmas, another short cassette demo. Now, I also won't discuss it at length here, as I don't own it physically. I will say that sonically it's the perfect halfway house between God's Pantheon and their 1995 effort, which we'll get onto in a second. Mostly reining in the previous demos, off-the-wall sound experiments and offering a neat set of way more fleshed out but still primitive ritualistic death dirges, which are even heavier on the post-punk influence and even bring in some folky touches in the rhythms and instrumentation. Lord Ominous's vocals are also way more confident and upfront here, hinting at the raw throat savagery that he'd unleash on this. Mirties' Metafora, or Metaphor of Death, which was released a couple of times on cassette in 1995 before gaining a belated CD reissue in 2016 on the Lithuanian label Inferna Profundus Records. Following on from the very brief a cappella introduction piece, right from the off it's clear that Anubi mean business and that they've upped their game in every conceivable way, while still remaining true to their experimental psychedelic roots. Beginning with clean-toned guitars and pounding post-punk toms, From Emptiness to Stone Silence is a supremely confident song. Once Thoth stomps on his fuzz pedal, we're treated to peals of Dave Gilmour-styled spaced-out slide guitar over majestic, epic riffing, quickly followed by a barrage of precise, thrashy palm muting, the band moving fluidly through time signatures all the while as Lord Ominous alternates between throat-tearing screams and declamatory cleans. Eventually, the song breaks down into a weird reverse guitar dreamscape before we take an extended trip back into the Gilmour slide zone. The heady, phased-out coda is the icing on the blackened psychedelic cake before, rather unfortunately, the song cuts off abruptly as if the tape just ran out on them. As we'll get onto, this song was actually reprised on Anubi's album a couple of years later. Beyond the Sands and Heat, Snow in Abydos begins in familiar blasting black metal territory, albeit topped off with Anubi's special brew of swirling trippy chaos. This is followed by an extended minimalist ambient coda with a clean guitar line echoing and looping, whilst moody synths come and go in the background, dark and droning at first, then more expressive and melancholic as the track nears its end. Following a sinister vocal intro, Celium sails us back into metallic waters, replete with occasional classic twiddly heavy metal tapping motifs. Yeah, this is the closest that this release gets to a full, straightforward metal song. Even so, the track still has a strange, polyrhythmic quality, with Renofa hammering out bizarre drum patterns against the slippery riffage, as Thoth disorientates us further by piling on his trademark globs of guitar phasing. Next up, it's Only Us Against Us, which starts life almost like an early 70s Popol Vuh piece, with clean female vocals soaring over a quiet meditative pulse, followed by a supremely sorrowful section of multi-track clean guitars. This is very much the calm before the storm, though, as the band pile in with more of that mid-pace goodness, topped off with some rabidly impassioned vocals from Lord Ominous. At various points in the song, we hear traditional folk instruments piping away beneath the psychedelic fuzz, which adds an extra layer of dark Lithuanian magic to proceedings. You'll Shine as a Desert in the Fire is probably the demo's weirdest piece. Mostly instrumental, this starts with a brief, jazzy motif played on a xylophone, after which the band break off into a loose jam, which gets more and more unhinged and trippy as it grinds along, eventually breaking down God's Pantheon style into sloppy madness, with Lord Ominous thoroughly losing his mind on the mic. The piece's creepy, extended tape warp outro leads us seamlessly into the last and longest track here, Quiet Breathing of the Silence. Now, talk about psychedelic. This consists mostly of layers of pulsing synth sonorities which swirl relentlessly like sonic whirlpools, pulling in shards of white noise, bits of crusty tape detritus, and assorted thunderous explosion sounds along the way as they warp and phase for almost 11 head-spinning minutes. So yeah, a huge step up from the previous two demos, and just a really solid piece of work all in all. After this third demo, the band started working with a newly established Italian label named Danza Ipnotica Records, whose first release was the Anubi 7-inch Sutimus Scambius. Again, I don't own it physically, so won't say much about it, but listening through, it's evident, even from this short EP, that they were well on the road to creating their magnum opus. So here we have it, Anubi's one and only full-length album, released in 1997, the title of which translates rather poetically to When the Eyes of the Full Moon Are Closed by Death. Again, as soon as it begins, it becomes clear that the band have entered a new chapter in their artistic development, the intro piece being a nightmarishly liminal pile-up of atonal organ warp, Lithuanian folk singing, and weirdly playful honks of freeform sax. This is followed by the first part of the title song, which pits ultra-precise thrashy chugging against scattered shards of free jazz piano from the new band member Lady Sleep. This soon breaks off into a catchy, folksy bounce before moving through a frankly bizarre passage dominated by the kind of chromatic shifts and odd time changes rarely heard outside of obscure, Nurse with Wound approved Euro prog music from the 70s. Things get even stranger during the coda as the bass suddenly jumps forward in the mix, offering up some amusingly cack-handed attempts at slapping and string popping, whilst Renofa flails about on his kit like a madman somewhere off in the distance. The next piece, simply titled Death, is a touch less hyperactive, though no less creative, with ultra-psychedelic drone guitars subliminally buried in the mix, whilst by the time the saxed up, Arabian-flavoured midsection comes around, Anubi almost resemble a morbid, metallic version of Gong or Here and Now. Part 2 of the title track follows, and is another of Anubi's pulsing, post-punk influence pieces, introducing some exploratory violin play into the album's increasingly heady sonic brew, whilst Lord Ominous offers up a formidably strong and moving clean singing performance. Track 5, the title of which I don't trust the Google translation of, and which I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce myself, packs so many ideas and changes into a little under 3 minutes that it's frankly futile of me to even try to talk about it, other than to say it's really good in a proggy, symphonic folk metal kind of a way. Then track 6 starts off weirdly with stock, bluesy hard rock riffing before amorphously and inexplicably shifting into a gorgeous extended section dominated by warm, melancholic synth strings and plainative peals of sax which build to a triumphant head, and you by now bring into mind Still Life era Van de Graaff Generator. The next 3 pieces are a lot more settled stylistically than much of what's gone before, with track 7, its title roughly translating to And the Sun Lost Half Its Face, carrying on the sad, reflective feeling of the previous piece, being a loose, organic ambient drift of delicate guitar harmonics, bass and soft keys, the rich chordal accompaniment from the synths, occasionally turning dissonant and shadowy like black clouds blocking out the sun on a peaceful summer's day. Osiris Advent is a slow grinder, reprise from the 1994 Mastabo Dvelksmas demo, which sports a catchy, repeated folky guitar refrain and another glorious synth-heavy outro, whilst Folkloric Song About Death does what it says on the tin, offering up 53 seconds of a cappella folk singing on the subject of mortality. As the album nears its close, we hit the remake of From Emptiness to Stone Silence, first heard on Mirties' Metafora. The arrangement here is quite a bit different, losing the forceful, Cure-esque intro, the breakdown with the reverse guitars, and also the intense, closing psychedelic jam, replacing them with loose sections dominated by meandering bass and keyboard noodling, but thankfully retaining the sections of spacey, Floydian slide guitar. Whilst this re-recording definitely fits well in the context of the album, overall the demo version is so much more powerful and dynamic that, if you're familiar with it, it's hard not to be a little bit disappointed by this later take. The final piece, Between Stone and Mirror, is another ambient affair with Lord Ominous delivering a dramatic monologue over layers of atonal, most likely improvised synths, which start off with Lady Sleep conjuring up a thoroughly nightmarish horror movie soundtrack feeling before floating into simpler, dark ambient territory as the sax player takes over from Lord Ominous's screams, closing things out with some moody, nocturnal free blowing. After a few seconds of silence, we get the obligatory hidden CD track, a brief classical MIDI guitar piece which brings the curtain down on Anubi's recorded legacy in a quiet, understated fashion. After the release of When the Eyes of the Full Moon Are Closed by Death, the band were poised for great things, apparently scoring a deal with the label Code 666. Unfortunately though, save for one as yet unreleased EP, no further Anubi recordings were ever made as Lord Ominous sadly died whilst salmon fishing on Lake Michigan in March 2002. A really tragic end then to one of the most promising and creative bands of their era, for whom the sky really was the limit in terms of what they could have gone on to create. Still, the music lives on, and for me at least, even this small handful of releases contains enough creativity and sonic depth to intrigue and captivate, even after a decade plus of listening. Unlike many, Anubi truly deserve the progressive tag, as with every release they were pushing towards new musical ground, striving to improve their playing, writing, arranging and production skills, whilst defiantly remaining eccentric and bizarre all the while. Whilst the reissues of the first and third demos are still relatively easy to find, strangely the full-length album hasn't been reissued on any format in over 25 years now and is getting tougher and tougher to score. Yeah, hopefully someday it'll be back out there for people to enjoy in all its weird psychedelic glory. So I hope this overview has been interesting. Black metal, especially strange and offbeat black metal, is one of my passions, so expect more videos along these lines in the not too distant future. Please hit subscribe if you want to be kept up to date on all future episodes. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon on the Acid Trash Jamboree.